Hello everyone, my name is Jennifer Hoglin. I'm here on behalf of the Calgary Horticultural Society, and we are going to start today on a series of 3 videos talking about fruit that grow well in Calgary and area gardens. So we're going to do 3 videos in total. The first one today, we're going to talk about tree fruit. The second video, we're going to talk about shrub fruit. And the third video, we're going to talk about all the other fruits. That's ground fruit, brambles, and vines. So for each fruit, we're going to go through and describe it a little bit, tell you why you need to grow it in your garden, and any special features there are or things you need to take into consideration before you choose it for your garden. And then we're going to go through some varieties that do really well here in Calgary. All right, so we're going to review the fruits that we're going to cover today. So for tree fruits, we are going to talk about apples, including crab apples and apple crabs. We're going to talk about pears, including apricots. Then we're going to move on to plums, and we're going to quickly go over nuts that grow well. We always forget about nuts when we're talking about food growing, so we're going to include them here with tree fruits. We're going to leave cherries for our talk on shrub fruit, as the majority of the cherries that grow here are shrubs, not trees. They have multiple stems. And we're also going to leave cherry plums, also known as chums, for our talk on shrub fruit, because once again, they are typically multi-stemmed shrubs, not trees. All right, we're going to start off with apples. So there are apples, crab apples, and there are also apple crabs. Apple crabs are actually a cross between apples and crab apples. And if you've ever had what you thought were crab apples that you could eat off the tree and were somewhat decent size and fairly sweet, those were probably apple crabs, not crab apples. Most crab apples are very small and very, very tart. Not too good for fresh eating off the tree. However, they still can be used for preserves, such as in jelly. Apples are a palm fruit, just like pears, mountain ash, saskatoons, hawthorns, and cotoneasters. All of those are palm fruit as well. Palm fruit have a receptacle in the center of the fruit that hold the seeds, and they also hold on to the blossom end all the way through the fruit's maturity. So you'll see that on the bottom of the apple, that little bottom part is what remains of the blossom. So you can tell that apples are ripe once the color of the skin has changed color. And you can tell what color they're supposed to get to based on the variety of apple that they are. A little bit of Google search or looking at the tags when you buy the trees from the nursery will help you out there. You can also tell that apples are ripe when the seeds turn from white to dark brown. So there are tons of varieties of apples that are available in Calgary and area nurseries and greenhouses. They vary in what makes them a good apple, either good eating apples, good storage apples, good processing or baking apples. You can also find apple varieties that are dwarf or semi-dwarf. That means they're much shorter. And you can also find varieties that are columnar trees. That means very thin, so they fit into small spaces. So the dwarf, semi-dwarf, and columnar are great trees if you have smaller yards. All right, so no matter the size of your urban lot, you will find a tree that fits in there for you. All apple trees benefit from some pruning and thinning, not mandatory every year, but occasionally pruning and thinning will help with larger fruit, sweeter fruit, and faster ripening fruit, as well as the overall health of your tree. So apples that are available here in Calgary all require a pollinator, okay? That means they need to have another variety of apple fairly close by that blooms at the same time so that our insect pollinators can move pollen from one variety to the other variety, pollinating our fruit, allowing us to get apples. Okay, So fairly close by in apple terms means within about a 2-city block radius. So if you have any other apples around you within that 2-block radius that bloom at the same time as your apple, you should have no problem with pollination. Okay, it does need to be a different variety, however. So in terms of varieties that are available here, they tend to fall into about 3 categories based on when the fruit ripens. So there's summer apples, also known as early season. There are early fall apples, known as mid-season, and there are fall apples, known as late season. Okay, they all vary in when they blossom and when the fruit ripens. Okay, the later varieties tend to store a little bit better than the earlier varieties. So if you're looking at storing, look at later varieties. And they also tend to be a bit sweeter. Downside to later varieties is that they may not finish fully ripening before we get our first fall frost. Okay, apples do not take hard frosts very well and they need to be picked before that point. So we may lose some apples if we have later blooming and ripening varieties. Okay, another option is a combo apple tree. What that is a single apple trunk or stem that has multiple variety apples grafted onto it. So you'll get branches of a different variety. You can have a number of different apples on one tree, usually 3 or 4 varieties on one combo apple. This is great if you're in a new neighborhood without a lot of apple trees around you. And also good if you have a very small yard and can only do 1 tree. All right, you're very short on space. So up here is a list of apples varieties that do very well here in Calgary and area. Okay, I've listed the apple crabs on there as well. All right, moving on to pears. So pears are also a palm fruit, just like our apples. They are a gorgeously shaped tree, really, really beautiful, but they are large. Okay, they are a full-size tree. So far, there have not been any, maybe a couple coming out, but definitely not very many at all of dwarf, semi-dwarf, or columnar varieties in terms of pears. Okay, what that means is you need to have some space to put a pear tree in. Full-size tree, definitely worth it. The trees that are available here in Calgary and area are just as hardy as the apple trees and just as versatile in terms of usages. Okay. Pears, you can tell, are ripe the same way that you can tell apples are ripe. The outside skin changes color, and the interior seeds turn from white to dark brown. Pears also have another way of telling they're ripe though, and that is by pressing very gently on the stem end of the fruit. If there's any give there, it's a little bit soft, then the fruit is ripe. That being said, we don't actually want to pick our pears when they are ripe. We want to pick them before they are ripe. And there's a couple reasons for this. Number one, pear fruit that ripens on the counter instead of on the tree tends to have far less of what are called stone cells. Stone cells are hard little bits inside the pear, really makes eating less enjoyable for sure. Okay, so if we pick them before they're ripe, keep them on our counter and eat them at their perfect ripeness, far less stone cells. The other reason we want to pick them before they're ripe is because they have a very short window of perfect ripeness, kind of like avocados in that way. If they're on our counter and we are looking at them every day, we can make sure we eat them at their perfect sweet ripeness. Okay, so think about picking your pear fruit before they're actually ripe. All right. So pears are self-pollinating. That means you don't have to have another pear tree anywhere near them. However, they're going to produce far more pear fruit if they do have another variety that they can pollinate with. Okay, not mandatory, but better if you can have another one close by. Okay, close by is the same as for apples, within about 2 city blocks. So there's lots of new varieties right now being tested of pears for our zone. So hopefully this list will increase in the next few years, and hopefully there will be some smaller dwarf and semi-dwarf varieties on here for you as well. Once again, as with apples, there are combo pear trees available out there at nurseries that have 3 or 4 different varieties of pears grafted onto a single trunk. Okay. Combo pears and combo apples are also a really great way to be able to try a number of different fruit, all from one tree. All right, moving on to plums. All right, plums belong to the prunus genera. That includes all of our stone fruit, peaches, apricots, cherries, almonds, all of them are prunus. Okay, plums that are hardy here in Calgary are a cross between 2 of these 3 types of plums: Japanese plums, Canada plums, and American plums. The Canada plums are the ones that are native to here in Alberta, and they're extra hardy. Cherry plums, or chums, I mentioned these at the beginning, are a cross between Japanese plums and sand cherries. Okay, sand cherries are actually not a cherry, they're a cherry-sized plum, and they're an ornamental shrub that you can commonly find here in nurseries. Okay, the chums are typically multi-stemmed, so as I said, we're gonna leave those for our next talk on shrub fruit, and we're gonna just concentrate on regular plums today. So, plums come in a huge number of different colors, skin colors that is. Typically yellow, gold, orange, red, purple, bluish purple, all the way very dark, almost black colors on the outside. The flesh on the inside is typically yellow or red. You can tell that a plum is fully ripe when you give them a nice gentle squeeze and they give, okay? Plums are super hardy here in Alberta, especially the ones that are crossed with our Canada plum. There are quite a few varieties that are even hardy down to zone 2. All right. So plums do need another pollinator of a different variety in order to produce fruit, just like apples. Because the parentage and the genetics on plums can be very complicated. As I mentioned, they're usually a mix of those 3 types. It can be really hard to find a pollinator that will work well with the plum that you would like to have. So the best idea is to talk to the garden center or the nursery where you're purchasing your plum and make sure that you have a second variety that will pollinate what you would like to buy. Okay, there are a couple charts online, but it's best to go to a local greenhouse. They will know what is hardy here and what is available for you to buy that will ensure pollination. Okay, when in doubt, a Canada plum will usually do it, but not for absolutely every type of plum, so it's better to just double check, okay? All right, so we need 2 types of plums. They tend to be fairly small trees, okay? So even if you have a smaller yard, you can usually fit in 2 plum trees. Those 2 plants that you need to pollinate do need to be fairly close together, much closer than with pears and apples, okay? Usually within about 100 feet, okay? So that's usually 2 varieties within your own yard, or maybe 1 in your neighbor's yard if you can convince your neighbor to get a plum as well, okay? Keep in mind that besides the varieties listed here, there are also some non-producing plums out there in greenhouses and nurseries. Muckle plum is a very popular one that don't produce any fruit at all or produce very low quality fruit. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at plums. Make sure you get one that has really good edible fruit that is right for you. All right, moving on to the closely related apricots. So apricots are another stone fruit in the genus Prunus. They're a smallish orange fruit and they have a velvety fuzzy skin just like peaches do. They're fairly rare in Calgary. There are not a ton of varieties available. We'll get to that. But there are a number of really old trees in some of our older neighborhoods. Inglewood, Kensington, I've seen a few in there that have been around for years and years and years and are still producing today. Apricots are fantastic for cooking, both sweet and savory dishes. Okay. So the biggest issue with apricots, and there is an issue with apricots, is that although the tree is really hardy, the blossoms are not. And they do tend to bloom fairly early in the spring. So what happens oftentimes is that the blossoms that are on our beautiful apricot trees get hit by a late spring frost. And that's it for blossoms that year, and that's also it for fruit that year, unfortunately. So oftentimes our apricot trees only produce every 2, 3, 4 years. Anytime we get one of those late frosts, that's kind of it for the year. There's a couple of things we can do to avoid this happening to our trees. And the very first one is placement. Make sure when you plant your apricot tree that you put it in a spot that defrosts last in your yard. Okay. We want to keep our apricot from coming out of dormancy for as long as possible. That will help our blossoms to not come out until later on in the year, which is a good thing, less chance of frost on those blossoms. Okay, the other thing that we can do to help avoid this is mulch. Mulch, mulch, mulch like crazy underneath the tree. Okay, a really deep, thick mulch under our apricot trees are going to help prevent it from breaking dormancy too early once again. Okay, so apricot trees for here in Calgary, okay, like our plums, do require a pollinator of a different variety within a fairly close distance, okay, usually within that 100 feet or so. Okay, any other variety of apricot will pollinate another variety of apricot. Also, Nanking cherries will work to pollinate all apricots. Okay, this is a really good option for you if you have a smaller yard. Nanking cherries are a shrub. We'll talk about them next time. And they will easily pollinate all of your apricots as well as give you fantastic cherries. Okay, so Westcott is the one that has been around the longest. It's the ones that you find in the older neighborhoods there. Really dependable, really hardy variety. Debbie's Gold is another really, really good one. Has fantastic flavor, really heavy producer, one of my favorites. Great tasting apricot. Casino is a newer variety that they are advertising as self-fertile. So I haven't tried that one specifically myself. But the producers tell us it's self-fertile, so you don't need to have another apricot or Nanking close by. Okay, moving on to nut trees. So no one ever thinks about nuts in terms of edible things for the Calgary garden, but there are actually a large variety of nut trees that do very well here. We have quite a few species. So up here on the screen, this bottom left one right here is a bur oak. Our top middle is a butternut, which is also known as a white walnut. Top right is a black walnut, just like we get in the stores. Bottom right here is a stone pine. Those are pine nuts. Yes, they grow here. And the middle one here is a hazelnut. Okay, so things to keep in mind with nut trees. With the exception of hazelnuts, which are a smaller tree or a larger bush, all of these trees are huge, very large, massive trees. Okay, so you need to make sure you have the room to put one in. Think about long term, okay? Don't leave some poor sucker who buys your house to dig out a monstrous tree that has gotten out of control and taken over the space, okay? The other thing to keep in mind with nut trees is that they can take a number of years to start producing. So you need to have a lot of room and you need to have some patience before you start getting nuts. Okay, so let's take a look at each one of these individually here. Okay. Black walnut is the biggest of all these trees, and it is huge. Think park-sized tree. Okay, black walnuts also produce a chemical called juglone from their roots. Juglone is a growth inhibitor chemical, and it helps to keep the walnut from having to compete with other plants growing around it. What it means for you as a gardener is that you have to do a fair amount of research to find plants that will grow underneath and around a black walnut if you want to grow plants there. So keep that in mind before you plant one out, that there are a few specific plants only that will grow underneath a black walnut tree. Butternut, or a white walnut tree, is a little bit smaller than the black walnut, still a decent sized tree though. It also produces juglone, but a little bit less than black walnuts. So you can grow a little bit more underneath there, but you still have to do some searching to find which specific plants will do well. Okay, beautifully shaped tree, by the way, butternut. Moving on to a bur oak. Bur oak is a super duper hardy oak tree. They're actually a zone 2. They do very, very well here in Calgary and area. They are, once again, very big trees. They're also really, really long-lived trees, like all of the oaks. Okay, so wherever you put it, it's going to be there for generations to come. So be prepared for that long life that they're going to have. Quick little note, bur oak also has the largest acorns of all of the oak trees in North America. So you're getting a good bang for your buck in terms of nut size. All right, Swiss stone pine. This is a pine tree, so an evergreen. It's a decently sized evergreen tree. The most popular one that is available here in Calgary is a Swiss stone pine. You may have seen a few of them planted around here for ornamental value. They're a beautiful pine tree. They are also really, really hardy. The pine nuts are produced inside of the cones. Okay, so you have to wait for the cones to open up and then they will fall out of the cone. Something to keep in mind with the stone pines is it takes very many years before they come into nut production. We're talking upwards of 15 years, okay? So this one is a long-term investment in terms of nut production. Excuse me. Last but not least is the hazelnuts. So hazelnuts are either a small tree or a large multi-stemmed shrub, depending how they have been trained when they're younger. You do require 2 varieties to get pollination and produce nuts. They are incredibly productive once they are established in the garden. Okay, lots of nuts produced on each shrub. The varieties that are available out there that do really well here in Calgary area is Andrew and Aldera. And there's also a new hybrid out there called Hazelbert, which does really well. Hazelbert is a cross between a filbert and a hazelnut, and is a great option for here in Calgary. A little note about hazelnuts. The shells on hazelnuts are actually fantastic for fuel, if that's something that you are interested in. The shells on hazelnuts actually have higher BTU rating than most of the woods that grow here in Canada. Okay, so great for burning for fuel. So that's it for fruit trees suitable for Calgary and area gardens. Lots of options out there, isn't there? I'm sure you can find one that will work well in whatever space you garden in. A couple of notes: if you have an abundance of fruit you cannot use yourself, keep in mind that gardeners are fantastic sharers, and think about your friends and family, and also think about the Calgary Food Bank. They always appreciate fresh produce. If you have so much fruit that you can't pick it all yourself, Calgary Harvest is a great organization that will help make sure none of your fruit goes to waste. And don't forget that just because we grow fruit trees for edible fruit, they are also gorgeous in their own right and great for use in our landscapes. All right, thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you learned something new. I hope I inspired you just a little bit. And we will see you on our next video where we're going to talk about shrub fruit. Thanks, everyone. Yummy gardening.